Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the rLounge. Today in the rLounge, a woman who decided dad's tea was more toxic than the relationship he was in. Things get deadly, fast. Stepmom tried to force me out of my father's will, so I sued her and won the entire estate. My father remarried about a year and a half ago. He met his new wife at some community fundraiser, and within 3 months, they were married. I tried to be supportive despite how rushed it seemed. Mom had been gone for 5 years at that point, and honestly, I was just happy to see him smiling again. I'm 30, financially independent, and have my own place about 20 minutes from my childhood home where my dad still lives. We've always been close, especially after losing Mom to cancer. The first few months seemed fine. My stepmom was pleasant enough when I'd visit, though I noticed she'd make little comments here and there. Nothing outright hostile, just subtle digs about how I was still so dependent on my father despite being a grown man with my own life. Then the changes started happening. I came over for dinner one Sunday and noticed most of my family photos were gone. The ones with Mom, the ones with me and Dad for fishing trips, even my college graduation photo. All replaced with generic artwork or new photos of just Dad and her. When I asked about it, she jumped in before Dad could answer, saying she was refreshing the energy of the house and that holding on to the past wasn't healthy. I pulled him aside later and asked if he was okay with all the changes. He seemed uncomfortable but said, "She thinks it's time for a fresh start, and maybe she's right." I didn't push it, but something felt off. This was the home he'd shared with Mom for 30 years, where I grew up. It wasn't just the past, it was our family history being erased. A couple months later, I noticed Dad mention that she was helping organize his finances, and that they were simplifying things. Again, nothing explicitly concerning, but the way he said it felt rehearsed, like he was repeating her words. Dad had always been meticulous about his money. He retired early after a successful career and had significant savings, investments, and property. He'd never needed help before. Then Dad's health started declining. It began with fatigue, then progressed to confusion, nausea, and weight loss. The doctors ran tests but couldn't pinpoint anything specific, suggesting it might be stress-related. She was always there at appointments, answering questions before Dad could, telling the doctors about his poor eating habits and refusal to take care of himself. Dad just sat there looking increasingly frail. I stopped by unannounced one evening after work to bring Dad some soup, his favorite that Mom used to make. I used my key to let myself in when no one answered the door. I could hear her on the phone in the study saying something about getting the paperwork finalized before it's too late and making sure it's ironclad. When she realized I was there, she hung up abruptly and acted flustered, saying she was just dealing with some insurance stuff. 3 days later, Dad was hospitalized. His symptoms had gotten worse. Severe stomach pain, vomiting, and confusion. She immediately established herself as the gatekeeper, telling the hospital staff when I could visit and for how long, claiming I stressed him out. She barely left his side, and on the rare occasion when she did, she made sure a nurse was present in the room with us. I finally got about 15 minutes alone with Dad when she went to deal with some paperwork. He seemed disoriented but grabbed my hand and said he was worried. When I asked about what, he said, "I don't understand what's happening with the money. She says she's handling everything, but..." He trailed off as a nurse came in, and by the time she left, my stepmom was back. I still had my key to the house, so while Dad was in the hospital and she was with him, I went to check things out. She had left her laptop open on the desk in the study. There were draft documents from an estate attorney showing a complete revision of Dad's will. In the original will, which I knew about, the estate was split between me and some charitable organizations Dad supported. In this new version, I was removed entirely. Everything would go to her. Everything. The house, the investments, the vacation property, all of it. But that wasn't all. I found emails between her and someone discussing how to legally secure the estate and manage the son problem. They talked about getting Dad to sign papers while he was compliant and referenced some kind of treatment schedule that made no sense to me at the time. I took screenshots of everything, sent them to myself, and put everything back as I found it and left. I did some digging into her background and discovered she had been married twice before, both times to wealthier older men. Both marriages lasted less than 2 years. Both husbands died, leaving everything to her. Both deaths were attributed to natural causes. The one family had apparently raised questions that never went anywhere. She had changed her name slightly after each marriage, which is why a basic background check hasn't raised red flags. I took all this information to an attorney who specialized in elder abuse and estate fraud. She looked over everything and agreed there was enough to be concerned about. We discussed options, but before we could implement any plan, Dad's condition worsened dramatically. When I got to the hospital, my stepmom was arguing with the medical staff, insisting they were overreacting and that Dad just needed rest at home. The doctor pulled me aside and said Dad's symptoms were consistent with some kind of poisoning, though they couldn't identify the source. I mentioned my suspicions, showed some of the evidence I'd gathered, and requested additional testing, including a toxicology screen. She lost it when she found out about the additional tests, demanding to know who had authorized them and insisting they were unnecessary. Her reaction only confirmed my suspicions. The test results came back showing elevated test levels of substances that shouldn't have been in Dad's system. These substances, when administered gradually over time, could cause all the symptoms Dad had been experiencing. I shared the information and my findings with hospital administration, who alerted the proper authorities. The hospital restricted her access to Dad pending investigation. Within days, Dad's condition began to improve. The police opened an investigation and I provided all the evidence I'd collected. When Dad was lucid enough, I showed him what I'd found. He immediately revoked all financial powers he'd given to her and restored his original will with me as the primary beneficiary. My stepmom didn't take this lying down. She confronted me in the hospital parking lot one evening, screaming that I'd poisoned Dad against her and that I would regret interfering. She threatened to destroy me if I didn't back off. I recorded the entire encounter on my phone and took it straight to the police, who used it to obtain a restraining order against her. Dad filed for divorce as soon as he was stable enough and pressed charges against her for attempted poisoning and financial abuse. But before the papers could be served, she emptied what she could from their joint accounts and disappeared. The police issued a warrant for her arrest, but she was gone. Dad was released from the hospital a week later. The doctor said he was lucky. The poisoning had been caught before permanent damage was done, but he would need time to fully recover. I moved back into the family home temporarily to take care of him. The police found evidence that she'd been slowly poisoning Dad with antifreeze in his tea, his favorite drink that he had every morning and evening. Dad seemed to be improving physically, but the emotional toll was heavy. He trusted this woman, welcomed her into his home and heart, only to discover she'd been systematically poisoning him and planning to steal everything he had worked for. Then one morning, my father had a massive heart attack, likely due to the long-term damage from the poisoning. According to the medical examiner, she had killed him after all, just more slowly than she'd planned. The police tracked her down in a neighboring state a few weeks later. She'd been staying at a luxury hotel using one of her aliases, spending the money she'd stolen from Dad. When they arrested her, she claimed she was innocent, that I had framed her because I was jealous of her relationship with Dad. To add insult to injury, her attorney filed a motion claiming she was entitled to part of the estate as Dad's wife, despite the divorce filing. They argued that Dad wasn't mentally competent when he revoked the powers and changed his will back, that he was under my undue influence. I filed a wrongful death lawsuit against her and fought her claims to the estate with everything I had. I provided medical evidence that Dad was fully competent when he made those changes, testimony from the hospital staff about her suspicious behavior, and all the evidence of her systematic poisoning and financial fraud. The criminal trial was straightforward. The police had found her search history, the financial transfers, the draft will documents, and the emails discussing how to manage the son problem. The criminal case against her was airtight. She was found guilty on all charges: attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and grand theft. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison, citing the calculated nature of her crimes and her complete lack of remorse. The civil case was equally successful. The judge awarded me the entire estate plus damages, ordering all assets she had hidden in or transferred to be returned. I also discovered she had created a fake insurance policy on Dad's name with herself as the beneficiary, leading to additional insurance fraud charges. It's been a long, painful journey, but in the end, justice was served. Update 2. Stepmom tried to force me out of my father's will, so I sued her and won the entire estate. It's been almost a year since my last update, and I wanted to share what's happened since then. First, thank you for all your continued support and kind messages. They've meant more to me than I can express during this difficult time. My stepmom's appeal was denied by the appellate court. Her defense team tried to argue that there was insufficient evidence to prove her intent to kill my father, that the financial transfers were part of normal marital asset management, and that my testimony was biased and shouldn't have been given such weight. The appellate judges unanimously rejected these arguments, citing the overwhelming physical evidence, the documented pattern of behavior, and the testimony of neutral third parties like hospital staff and financial experts. The financial recovery process has been tedious but mostly successful. The forensic accountants traced about 85% of the money she had stolen from my father's accounts. Some had been spent on luxury items that were seized and sold at auction, with the proceeds returned to the estate. Some had been transferred to offshore accounts that required international legal cooperation to recover. A small portion seems to be permanently lost, cash withdrawals that can't be traced, and money given to accomplices who have disappeared. Speaking of accomplices, the investigation revealed she didn't act entirely alone. The person she had been emailing about managing the son problem turned out to be her previous marriage's divorce attorney, who had helped her navigate the legal system before. He's now under investigation for conspiracy and could face disbarment and criminal charges. 2 of her friends who provided false testimony about my father's mental state have been charged with perjury. On the personal front, I've been working through my grief with the help of therapy and support groups. I've decided to keep the family home rather than sell it. I've received closure in unexpected ways. A nurse who cared for my father during his hospitalization reached out to share that in his final days, when he was more lucid, he expressed how proud he was of me for uncovering the truth and protecting him. She hadn't come forward during the trial because it wasn't directly relevant to the medical evidence, but wanted me to know. Hearing that Dad understood what was happening and was grateful rather than resentful for my intervention has helped erase some of my lingering guilt. The financial aspects of the estate have finally been completely resolved. All contested assets have been returned and accounted for in a restitution order. The tax implications of everything that happened were complex, but with expert help, I've navigated them without additional losses. The justice system worked in our case, but I know that's not always true. If I hadn't found the evidence when I did, if the doctors hadn't ordered the right tests, if the police hadn't taken my concerns seriously, the outcome could have been very different. My father still lost his life, but at least his killer is facing consequences and his wishes for his estate are being honored. For those who followed my story from the beginning, thank you for your support. That woman is straight up evil. I mean, erasing family photos, cutting you out of the will, slowly poisoning your dad? What on earth? What's crazy is how calculated she was, playing the sweet, helpful wife while slowly ruining your dad's health and trying to steal everything he worked for, and then having the nerve to scream at you in a parking lot like you were the problem. Unreal. That's actually horrific. 25 years in prison? Good. She deserves every second. That woman ruined lives and tried to get away with it, and yet you still managed to make sure your dad's wishes were honored and the estate stayed safe. Absolute nightmare, and yet you come out on top. What do you make of this? Thank you for joining us today in the rLounge. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time. And please put your chair back where you found it.